our second AFINet conference and the first virtual conference we are doing. It has been, well, quite a long ways due to the pandemic to get where we are now. We were planning to have another conference last year, which had to be postponed, and due to the current situation, we had to postpone it once more. So we hopefully will have a live conference next year in Rotterdam. And since not all of you might be familiar with AFINet, I would like to give a brief introduction what AFINet is all about. AFINet was funded in 2014, but has a far longer history, which is linked to great researchers like Jim Orford, Richard Velleman, Lorna Templeton, Alex Copello, and colleagues. And AFINet is a small charity registered in the UK, which tries to bring together researchers, policymakers, practitioners, and also experts by experience regarding the influence addiction has on families. The core aims of the AFINet philosophy are to disseminate internationally a non-pathological family member-centered model of the circumstances and needs of family members affected by the addiction of their relatives. And of course, to promote research about the experience of family members affected by their relatives' addictions all around the world. And to promote good evidence-based prevention treatment practice relevant to the needs of these affected family members. Furthermore, we're aiming to advocate with policymakers and to include international organizations and national governments for greater awareness of the circumstances and needs of family members that are affected by their relatives' addictions and to promote better services for them, and generally to raise awareness at a global level regarding the needs of families affected by addiction. We have many participants in this conference who are already AFINet members, but not all of them are. So joining AFINet is free and not associated with any obligations. And we provide many resources regarding family-related interventions and family-related research on our website that is accessible for family members. And of course, you might also have the opportunity to exchange experience or start collaborations with other people who are working in the field. So we really would welcome if people who are not already members of AFINet would become so in the nearer future. And regarding our conference today, we, like I said, we were thinking that at least it's important to give AFINet members an opportunity to present their findings, but we're also very happy that we got plenary speakers who we will move on soon, today with Jeff Foote and tomorrow with Catherine Sorstel and Chidor Rafa difficult to pronounce, Matsvamutse. And of course, many research projects from family members. And this evening, we'll also have our annual general meeting. And this conference wouldn't have been possible without the engagement of especially Richard Velleman. Many thanks. but also to Jill Belloman and Minna Iva, who, well, did a lot of really important work in the background. So a big thanks to all of them. And Richard now will tell you a little bit about what we've been doing during the pandemic. So this includes webinars, but also this conference, and he will lead you, I think, a bit through all the issues that will take place today and tomorrow. So Richard, up to you.
Okay, thank you, Gallus, and welcome everybody. As Gallus says, we have more than 130 people registered for the conference. We're not expecting everyone to all be on at one time. As everyone will be aware, we've organized the conference in 2 half days so that people from the east of the world can join more easily. I say more easily because I think it's going to start for people in New Zealand at something like 7:30 tomorrow evening. But nevertheless, so they can at least join tomorrow and today for people from the west of the world, from United States and Canada and South America and so on, as well as in Europe. So I'm expecting perhaps up to 60 or 70 people each day will be joining, but over the 2 days, the 130 to 140 people. So this is very large for a virtual conference. We were thinking we might be lucky if we had 50 people who might be interested. So we're very pleased about it. And the conference, as you all know, because you've all signed up for it, is a very exciting one. We have a range of speakers, some people who are practitioners, some people who are researchers, some people who are both. The range of countries is quite vast. We've got 14 different countries ranging from east to west, from New Zealand to the USA and Canada, via Australia, Malaysia and Europe, and ranging from the south to the north, from South Africa and Zimbabwe all the way up to Norway. So we're having a very extensive coverage across the world of people who are coming together with one thing which brings them all together, which is this real interest in how family members are affected by someone, by a relative in their family, or it doesn't have to be a relative, it can be a friend, a neighbor. It could be school teachers who are affected by their pupils' behavior, but people who are affected by someone close to them who has a problem with alcohol or drugs or gambling. We're going to hear today and tomorrow from a mix of research-based evidence and also practice-based evidence. So I think, and that's something we're very keen on, that we're not only ivory tower workers interested in systematic reviews and large-scale randomized controlled trials, although of course we are interested in that, but we're also interested in evidence that comes from practitioners and from people who are expert through their own experience. One of the things we did, we are a very small charity and we get no income. And as Gallus has already mentioned, we have been very keen right from the outset to make sure that this is something which is free. We do not want finances to be an issue about who does and does not become a member of AFINet. But one thing we tried to do in this conference is ask people for donations. And we've been incredibly pleasantly surprised by how generous people have been with their donations. So I want to thank you very much, because that is going to actually allow us to run the charity and our website for the next year. It's been so helpful that we're actually thinking that we might introduce this for our future webinars. And I will say more about that in 1 second. But a big thank you to those people who did find the wherewithal to donate, and we very much appreciate it. And also, while I'm thanking people at the beginning, I'd like to thank the people the fellow trustees who've done so much help for this conference, particularly those who have agreed to chair sessions, as well as, of course, Gallus as our chair of trustees, and as he said, Jill and Mina for all their huge amount of work. One of the things that we've done during the last year, because of the pandemic, was putting on a series of webinars. We started in October. not sure how well they would do, or whether we'd get people who would want to give webinars, and whether we'd get people who wanted to attend them. I have to say it's been remarkably successful. We've now run a webinar every single month. These are all recorded and are all put on our website, and people can watch them using Zoom. And one of the other things we've discovered during lockdown is that Zoom has a subtitle facility, and for some people, not for all it seems, but for some people it has a translation facility. And that means that people can certainly read the English of what someone is saying, and maybe even translate that into their own native language. So that's a hugely helpful thing. And as I say, all of those webinars are on the website. We haven't got one this month because we have the conference, but from next month onwards, we have a program which already goes through to next April. I'll just draw your attention to the next couple. So on the 19th of October, we have a webinar from Alicia Ventura from Boston, talking about family members and treatment providers and the interaction with the treatment system in Boston, United States. And then in November, we have Doreen Van Nemen, who is one of our trustees, and she is going to be talking about effective family members and study success. So two very different but very interesting webinars. And as I say, we have them all the way through from December, January, February, March. They're all on the website. Please do have a look, and it will be lovely to see many of you there in our future webinars. I think that's all I want to say, so I will hand back to you, Gallus, to introduce Dr. Jeff Foote, our first plenary speaker.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Jeff Foote, who will have a plenary talk about the invitation to change approach, evidence-based principles and practices for helping a loved one change. Dr. Foote is co-founder and co-executive director of the Center for Motivation and Change in Manhattan, as well as a residential treatment center in the Berkshire Mountains of Western Massachusetts. And he's not only a clinician, but also a researcher who has received federal grant funding for his work on motivational treatment approaches and substance abuse treatment research. And he's especially focusing on the implementation of evidence-based treatment. And I was especially happy that Richard managed to recruit Jeff for this talk, since he wrote a guide for family members, which is, I think, a real substantial piece of work in the field. Beyond Addiction, How Science and Kindness Help People Change. And I assume that a lot of your plenary today will be based on this work, but I also would highly recommend, if you work with family members, to recommend this book to them. So Jeff will be talking for 45 minutes now, and then we'll have 15 minutes time for questions and debate. And so a warm welcome to Jeff Foote, and the floor is yours.
Before you do, Jeff, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt. Can I ask everyone, while there is a speaker speaking, to turn their cameras off, as well as make sure their microphones are turned off? And then when we have the discussion afterwards, if people could turn their cameras back on, and obviously have their microphone on when they're asking a question. And then with the next speaker, again, if you can turn your cameras off. Sorry to interrupt, but thank you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you all can see those slides now.
Yes, we can.
Okay. And thank you for having me to speak today and be part of this lovely gathering and group. It's really inspiring to even hear the introductions here. As Gallus mentioned, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I founded some treatment centers here in the U.S. in Manhattan and Massachusetts. But I'll just also say I'm particularly grateful to Doctors Orford and Velleman and your whole group there. About 10 years ago, we were approached at CMC here in the U.S. By a national organization, Partnership for Drug-Free Kids, that provides information for families about substance issues. And they were asking us a couple of things. One was to train their staff in craft, and secondly was to develop a national peer-to-peer coaching program for parents who are struggling with their kids' substance use, and to develop both the content for that program and the training process using evidence-based ideas and practices, which seemed like one of the smartest things I had ever heard in my career, and also fairly daunting. And I at that time looked around to see if anyone was paying attention to families at all, and you all were, which was awesome. And not only were you doing research and writing articles, that you were also doing a very particular thing, which was asking families directly about their experiences. And I have to say that was very inspiring for us, and inspired our process, which in the development of this invitation to change model that I'm going to talk about, has been an iterative process of working with families and parents, listening to them, trying stuff out, going back to the cutting room, trying some more. But again, based on this idea that we needed to know their experience to be effective in developing these tools and in developing a model. So subsequently, and from afar, I sort of have the sense that our groups have come at this in similar, compassionate, stigma-busting, evidence-based, and I would also say outraged ways. And maybe I'm hopefully projecting about the outrage part of that over the lack of care for families in treatment systems. But while it seems that you folks are working to facilitate access and methods for professionals to help families more effectively, and quite a bit more from the introduction I just heard, I think what we've approached this with is trying to create direct access for families themselves to evidence-based and compassionate ideas and tools, as well as to focus on peer-to-peer support and the development of protocols for that. And kind of if professionals want to join in, that's okay also. So our foundation, which is the Foundation for Change, is geared towards these ideas that I have here: getting effective and accessible evidence-based tools for change to the families and loved ones of those struggling with substance use. Hopefully over time, providing a sense of community for families in the larger culture, changing the conversation about substance use from shame and isolation to compassion and engagement. And if we manage to encourage hope and compassion, that would be pretty great also. I'm going to be trying to stay close to my notes here, because otherwise I will never get through this in 45 minutes. Our approach was somewhat based on this kind of iceberg-shaped need that is out in the world. So first, the fact that very few of those who are actually struggling with substances are accessing help. So this would be US-based statistics. And so even in this group of people who are defined as having substance use disorder, the amount of people getting help is minimal. And then that iceberg increases massively, and unfortunately the iceberg analogy works because it increases enormously and out of sight. The family member impact that we're all familiar with is sort of the financial, health, work productivity, relationship issues, mental health issues, and so forth. But we were also interested in the second group there, the going underground part of this impact, and the isolation of families from shame, anger, despair, and other emotions that they go through, and just the suffering that people are struggling with. So because we also realized, especially by listening to families and parents' experiences, that in the context of a family's worst fears, experiences, this is the kind of stuff they hear at sort of their worst point in their lives as a family. They're told to do things like stop enabling, told that they're codependent, told there's one way to do this, which is to go to 12-step fellowship meetings for families, told scary things like if you don't detach, your kid or your spouse is going to die, and just that endless sort of litany of things that you're doing wrong as a family member. And you can't get it right. You're either too lax, or you're too strict, or you're too involved, or you're not involved enough. And really, we could have a list of 50 items that are damning charges against family members. And this, I think this is probably a pretty strong cross-cultural pull for families to self-blame, feel embarrassed about the problems that they're having in their family. And even if they sort of get the idea that this is not their fault, they feel ashamed and embarrassed anyway. And then they come to us. This is some of the work that you folks have done. And it's not a great improvement. They hear, this is how they hear it's how they experience us, which is feeling judged, feeling that we're unsympathetic, feeling not listened to, and that decisions are getting made without any input by them, that's any kind of real input, and a sense of hopelessness about this whole process. So again, a shout out to all the work that you folks have been doing in trying to work with healthcare professionals to think differently about these kind of issues and to access families in a different way. But really, we kind of come back to what a waste all of this is, that this group who could be so powerful in helping promote change is kind of cast aside and rendered ineffective in these stigmatizing ways. So the not so happy summary of all that, substance use is a devastating problem. Most people are not getting help. Services and training, I could have shown you 50 more slides about the lack of adequate training for physicians, for graduate students, for everybody in the mental health field related to substance issues. But they're poor and they're not evidence-based often. Families are suffering. They have no idea what to do. And they're often given tools that are not particularly helpful. So that was the sad starting point for a lot of the work we were trying to engage in. And again, we came at this really from a community level and in this iterative manner of putting together elements of helping that could be adapted at a community level and actually taken on by people, lay people, and helping kind of change this conversation from the bottom up instead of from top down, where the conversation doesn't seem to be driven very well in a change way. And the work we've been doing then has resulted both in an approach that we call the invitation to change, which I'll describe, as well as a training process, which I won't describe today, which is just an interesting part of this whole endeavor for us. How do you actually train people? But that's a longer discussion. So the invitation to change is what we would consider a helping model. That is, we're training people to be more effective helpers, and a model that's accessible to lay people, parents, partners, and professionals. And the model doesn't change depending on who you are. The model is accessible for both of those groups and everybody in between. We think of it as a compassionate approach for encouraging change, using evidence-based principles and practices. We like that phrase, science and kindness. And really has been drawn primarily from three buckets. Craft, and these are all buckets that everyone here is familiar with. Craft, motivational interviewing, maybe less so with acceptance and commitment therapy. I'm not sure how familiar folks here would be with that set of ideas. And there are other things, a smattering of other things, which I'll not talk about, but that are also part of this model. I think there's several important frames, however, to frame up this kind of work. The first is, how are we thinking about this task of being a helper? And sort of unlike what families often feel a lot of pressure to find, which is a set of specific answers, like what should we do right now, and who should we go to, and what treatment should happen, and what medication should we be on, and what should we say to our kid? We're trying to help helpers develop a process, not a set of answers, which is a tension when you're talking to someone who wants answers. But we think of it as trying to create conditions for change. When you're in that boat, that process boat, some of the hard parts for the helpers are things like, you're not going to know stuff. People are going to ask you for answers and you're not going to know what those answers are. And we're going to ask you to pause as you're trying to help someone. We're going to ask you to be uncomfortable. We're going to ask you and them to practice and learn new things and to think about valuing yourself in this process. So it's sort of the old teaching people to fish instead of handing them the fish. The second frame that I think is important for all of us in the helping role is just the context of helping. And since we're trying to muster the power of these families, the context these helpers come from matters a lot. So they're in pain, they're ashamed or feeling terrible about themselves, feeling like they don't deserve to be even sitting here getting help to know how to help. They're having all kinds of powerful emotions and thoughts about their loved ones and about themselves. And they have a huge number of cultural messages about substance use circulating in their head. So those messages and understandings and emotions that they bring with them are really pretty critical contextual information to bear in mind in helping them to be helpers. This would be the kind of thing we use when we're training peer coaches, for instance, specifically trying to work with that context. With us knowing that the context in their head is not going to necessarily be a helpful context for them in their helping role. So this training process, again, that I'm not going to talk about, includes stuff like this kind of an idea, the 70-30 rule. And if anyone asks me the evidence base behind the 70-30 rule, I will tell you there is zero evidence behind this idea. It is mostly a training idea, which is a huge underlining and valuing of the coach's lived experience, and that the power of that role as a helper, which is very important affirmation for helpers to have when they don't think they know how to help. So we talk about that. It's a flip for them coming in to be trained as a helper, for us to be saying, you're the ones who are powering this, you're the ones who matter in the helping role here. We're going to give you some strategies and so forth, but this is what matters here, is the 70% of experience you bring and your willingness to bring it. We started out with working with the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids, as I mentioned. I've done a bunch of trainings with them over the last 8 years for peer-to-peer coaching, and trained a number of coaches. Subsequently, we've also started to do trainings outside of that framework, and continued to develop the invitation to change approach, and train family members directly, train professionals, and that's taken on a larger bunch of our time at this point. So here's the approach. Again, it's a composite of a number of evidence-based approaches. I cannot say that this is an evidence-based approach because it's not. We have not collected the evidence about it enough yet, and that's part of the undertaking that we're engaged in. But we've certainly tried it out on the road with peer coaches and families for years now. It includes 3 major sections for being a more effective helper. There is helping with understanding, there is helping with awareness, and there is helping with action. And all of those are rotating around the behaviorally and motivationally important idea of practice as the key to actual change, which is the center of this circle. We also put it in a visual form for memorability of this idea, so people can kind of access this through these icons, and these ideas are apparent visually. This is the written out version of it, and I'm going to walk through these sections for the rest of this discussion. So first section, helping with understanding. 3 ideas in the helping with understanding section, but I'll just say that the understanding and the perspective shift that this new understanding provides is foundational to the effectiveness of the other sections. So as I go through this, I'm going to generally describe each idea, give an example of an exercise we might use to teach this, and describe why the idea matters, sort of what we think of the impact of each idea for a family member or a helper. So the first part of helping with understanding is behaviors make sense. And hopefully I'm not speaking so quickly that you can't understand what I'm saying, but I'm trying to stick with my 45 minutes. So behaviors make sense is again, kind of the foundation here. And just the simple but kind of heavy idea that behavior even when it's destructive or has a destructive aspect to it, is motivated by reinforcement. We don't necessarily use the word reinforcement as part of this, but it is why we as animals repeat behaviors, because it's reinforcing. With the metaphor here of, or the actuality of, if using substances was like touching a hot stove, your loved one would have stopped already. And that's, again, part of this work here has been to just make these ideas straightforward and simple to understand, like, oh, right, if there was a hot stove, they wouldn't do it. We then try to illustrate these ideas. So in this case, we walk through an idea of, if I told you that I could help you experience or feel any of these things, mellow out, less depressed, feeling good, lose weight, cut your anxiety down, help you feel part of things, and this whole list. We walk through this whole list and then say, would you want any of these things? And is there anything wrong with pursuing these things? And then the contrast is, and if I told you I have a really excellent solution to allow you to experience those things, and it's called alcohol or it's called heroin, what would you think then? So the take home here would be the reasonableness, basically, and the humanity of motivation for substance use, what those motivations would be, as opposed to whatever else you think is motivating this, or you think it's a disease, or various other ways you could describe this. Here's what's reinforcing about this. I'm going to get these things. I'm going to experience these things. This is one of my favorite little quotes. They speak of my drinking, but never of my thirst. I think of our treatment programs that way. We spend a lot of time talking to people about their drinking, but never about what they're thirsty for. And another angle on this particular idea of behaviors make sense is the video we developed as part of our training, which is about the impact of seeing the reasons behind behavior. So I'm going to play that.
Imagine this scenario. You're walking down the side of a two-way street when you look up and see a person trying to cross. There's plenty of traffic and you can hear cars and trucks whooshing by. The person you noticed looks impatient, upset, frantic, and does not seem to be considering the danger ahead of them. Instead, all they seem to be concerned about is getting to the other side of the street. Take a moment to consider the following. What are your thoughts and feelings about this person and their behavior? And what are some actions that those thoughts and feelings make you want to take? You may be thinking, what's wrong with them? What's making them crazy enough to try and cross traffic without thinking? Are they dangerous? You may be feeling scared for what's about to happen, anxious for the person you're watching, and confused by their behavior. Some actions you may want to consider include moving away from the situation by leaving so you don't have to see the person get hurt, or engaging in the situation by yelling at them to stop to try to promote a positive outcome. Continue imagining the same scenario, only now I'll give you a little bit more information. Before you saw this person, they had been driving further down the road with their dog in the back seat. At a stoplight, the dog jumped out of the car and began running for traffic. The person is now frantically trying to get the dog back inside of the car before it gets hurt. Now take a moment to consider the following. What are your thoughts and feelings about this person after learning about their reason for trying to cross such a busy street? What are some actions those thoughts and feelings make you want to take? You might be thinking, how can I help this person? How do I keep him safe when he's upset and not thinking about his own safety? You might be feeling compassion, sadness for the person's situation, and fear it might go badly. You may be more inclined to take action by offering to help, calling for more help, or trying to intervene in some way. The purpose of this exercise is to show that when another person's behavior seems irrational or erratic or scary in some way, in the way that substance use often does, it can push us into a let me get away from this or make it stop response, and make us want to move away from it entirely. It can be hard to see how to be helpful in these situations or to even want to help, while also experiencing our own set of thoughts and emotions as a bystander. By taking a moment to put the behaviors into a larger context, by understanding the why behind their behavior, we can start to make sense of the motivation behind them. We can then decide on a productive way to move forward. So let's think back to the scenario we just imagined. If we start off deciding that the person running in the road is doing it just because they're crazy, then we are also limiting ourselves from seeing the full picture. This way of thinking is natural, but does not facilitate positive action on our part. Instead, if we decide that the person trying to cross the road has a valid or a sympathetic reason for their behavior, we open ourselves up to more understanding. We can now accept new information and learn that the person is trying to find their dog. This information will most likely shift our thoughts and emotions surrounding the behavior, and we'll then be able to come up with and want to come up with a productive plan on how to help them. Finally, let's put this all in the context of substance use. If we decide that a person who is using substances is doing so just because they are an addict, aka a morally bankrupt, irresponsible person, we will very effectively shut out information that could help us understand their behaviors. And without that understanding, we won't be able to find a constructive way to offer support. However, if we open ourselves up to understanding that all behaviors make sense, we will learn that people use substances for valid reasons. Examples could include using substances to ease anxiety, feel more ready to handle daily life, or get to sleep despite physical pain. This type of information will then help us begin moving forward by supporting our loved ones in a productive way.
Okay, so hopefully we're seeing the impact of understanding on our desire to help and our sense of empathy in helping and how reasonable it seems to try to help. If we think about the impact of this kind of idea on the helper, some of the ideas are that it helps them not take the behavior personally if I'm a family member, increases our empathy for the behavior, it helps us step toward them instead of stepping away, and then starts a whole cascade of increased empathy, increased collaboration, seeing the behavior as less random and more predictable, which then opens the door for strategizing and behavior substitution. If we think about the impact of this understanding on the helper's part, on the person we're trying to help, the types of things you see are having the helpee feel more validated as a whole human being, allows them to be more open and not go underground, and allows them to start to consider change in a more open way. So with the above in mind, behaviors make sense. A logical and pretty critical one for families as a follow-up additional idea is the idea that behaviors make sense differently for different people. So behavior is complex and people enter into and leave substance use for many reasons, and that different strategies are going to work for different people. One size does not fit all is the idea here. The impact of knowing that is that it really does allow for a broadening of questions and possibilities for a family. It really provides hope for them in knowing that there are different ways to help. They don't have to do one thing, which is often what they're told. They have one choice in how to help. And that the helping can be aligned with their values and what they know about their loved one, which increases the flexibility in how families can be of help, and allows for more options and choices. We're particularly good in the US at black and white thinking and jamming people into the corner with only one choice. So this can be a particularly useful set of ideas for folks here. These are the kind of things that we would then hope would be more open to a family member. What are some options for treatment that your loved one might consider? What might be helpful and why for your loved one, not generically? What resources outside of treatment might be helpful that you could consider? And then things like what behaviors could be replacing the old behaviors, and what would be challenging for your loved one about adopting those new behaviors. Last part of this logic chain about helping with understanding is that ambivalence will also make sense if you think that behaviors make sense. So we're trying to help normalize ambivalence as part of this process, as an expected part of the process of change. that if there were reasons why the original behavior made sense, those reasons won't just vanish. And from a sort of a critical behavioral information about ambivalence, this first part here, that it's normal, that new behaviors can compete with the old ones, but that they don't erase the old ones. That's important information for people to have. The old behaviors are not going to vanish from their brains. The old thoughts are not going to vanish. And sort of on a critical relational information about ambivalence level, the idea that ambivalence can be seen in a person's behavior and language, you can perceive it. We think of it as red and green lights, which I'll get to in a little bit. That ambivalence is actually sensitive to the response that you have as a helper, and that common reactions people have to ambivalence, however, are, I want to make that go away. I want to talk some sense into you. I want to confront you, or lecture you, or give you more information, which are not particularly helpful strategies for dealing with ambivalence. And what does this idea give us? It normalizes the process of change as being a back and forth between reasons for change and reasons for not changing, which would be obviously a motivational idea straight out of motivational interviewing. And that the idea that ambivalence is there is not a failure, and that's not a sign that things are going in the wrong direction, which then allows families to empathize with their loved one more fully, and reframe the whole experience. So it's not about being in denial, which is sort of just a blanket label. Okay. So those are the ideas of helping with understanding. And I'll just to walk back through those. And I'm walking back through this section with helping with understanding, because these ideas alone, I think, can sometimes create just a powerful sort of transformative shift in the way people are even interacting with each other within their families. So the ideas are providing a framework that allows the helper to understand instead of label, allows them to have a desire to approach instead of stepping back, allows them to feel compassion, and to understand the role of behavioral strategizing. They're also helping the helper to understand that both their loved one's uniqueness and their own uniqueness as a helper matters, and that they're an expert in the uniqueness of their own family, and that the helps prepare them for a sort of a jagged, nonlinear course of change. Okay. Our next section is helping with awareness. And this has three parts: self-awareness, willingness, and self-compassion. We're starting with self-awareness as the foundation, and this self-awareness as a foundation. This has two aspects. The first one is this one, just helping people notice their feelings, thoughts, physical reactions, and actions that they experience as they're engaged in this struggle. So any number of things that they can start to pay attention to. And here, I think, again, we're asking people to slow down, check in, start to develop the muscle of self-awareness with these as anchors. And ultimately, a part of the message here is we're asking you to be part of the change. We're including you in this change process. This is like an illustrative example, exercise, the type of thing we would use with people, where we would go through, can we actually help you stay connected with your loved one by checking in with yourself, which is a new idea for many people. Just the idea of slowing down, acknowledging yourself, taking a breath, and this metaphor of driving. If you were driving without and refusing to look at the gas gauge, that wouldn't be such a great strategy for moving forward. We would follow that up with an exercise where we would say, what's hard? So let's fill out a sheet of paper where you write down what's hard about this for you. And are you acknowledging this to anyone in your life? And can we start to help you do that more? You get all kinds of reactions from this idea of self-awareness, including I don't want to have a pity party for myself, or I just got to keep moving forward, instead of the idea of acknowledging things as a way to help move forward more sustainably. And then the second part of the self-awareness section is this, which is noticing what matters to you as a person, as well as what matters to you in your relationship with your loved one. And this is kind of a values awareness. And people come up with things like kindness, connection, safety, patience, dedication, these types of things. But it's sort of like helping establish a North Star or a directional arrow for people, which makes this drive more sustainable for them. This is an exercise that we use for coming into contact with this idea of values as an anchor. So again, we had to sort of like check in with yourself on a very basic thoughts, feelings, physical sensations level, and then check in with yourself on a values level. This was something that came from ACT, and I usually do this with people in a very experiential 5-sense visualization way, which we take from sports psychology, and just have them really walk through in full imagination an 80th birthday celebration. And this is a very poignant and powerful exercise for people to think about if your loved one who is struggling now were at your 80th birthday celebration, how would you want them to describe your presence during that period of their life when they were struggling? What qualities would you want them to remember lovingly, and what impact would you want them to be describing? And then compare that with the you, how connected they feel to that you, to that person who's being described in that nice way. And then what would you need to do today to start to become more of that honored person? So this is a values-based exercise that brings home, what am I doing with myself right now, and how am I interacting with my loved one? And the simple, version of the impact of self-awareness is it really helps people become more proactive and less reactive, which is a critical tool for family members in the midst of this emotional storm that they're going through. Second part of the awareness section is something we call willingness. Also really comes from a lot of work in ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and which is this idea of allowing awareness of both the pain and what we value, leading to something we're talking about as willingness. So here's a typical exercise we would do. We would walk through this idea where we have a couple of circles and we say, what matters to you in your relationship with your loved one? You can do this with a coach also. What matters to you as a coach in your role as a helper? And then what are the painful and uncomfortable parts about this struggle with your loved one or struggle as a coach? And it's done as 2 circles. So these are the kind of things that people typically talk about. Hopefulness, what matters to me is being connected or loving or kind. And what are the hard parts about this? I have lots of fear and heartbreak and anger a lot, and I feel betrayed by my loved one and so forth. Then the reveal in this exercise is this idea of a coin. That in fact, these 2 concepts, these 2 experiences go together. They're not separable. They're 2 sides of the same coin. And you don't actually get to choose one versus the other. They come along together. So willingness then is this idea that you have a choice. You can stay connected to helping your struggling loved one, and that's going to be painful and uncomfortable because it matters, and that's not going to go away, and that the goal is not to make that pain go away, but to work to remain open and flexible through that uncertainty and pain. So we think of willingness as choosing to accept that what is happening is actually happening, inviting it in and allowing it to be true. And that offers us the chance to keep working toward what we really care about. The idea points out the very compelling other choice that we can and do make all the time, which is the human nature part of wanting to avoid pain and make it stop, which we do in all kinds of ways, controlling the other person, controlling ourselves by shutting down, putting down that coin, so to speak, in any number of ways. And that willingness is choosing to pick up that coin with both sides. A parent once said that willingness idea has helped me change meaningless suffering into meaningful suffering. And I just thought that was such a lovely way to put it. And the impact. So we can contrast an unwillingness stance and a willingness stance in a behavioral terms, which is you get something out of being unwilling. You get something out of putting that coin down. The short-term positives are you get to remove the discomfort. The long-term negatives are you're going to decrease the possibility of valued aspects of your life. And you're going to increase the possibility of other difficult things increasing, actually. Whereas a willingness stance actually has short-term negatives, which is helpful to point out, which is you're going to be uncomfortable and have all these difficult emotions, but you're going to likely increase the possibility of moving towards valued aspects of your life. So that's the willingness idea. And then that translates to our third part of awareness, which is self-compassion, which is not self-care, as often talked about in the recovery world. You should be doing more yoga, or you should be getting more downtime, all of which are fine things to do. We're not talking about this idea of pampering yourself or forgetting your troubles. We're talking about acknowledging yourself and your experience with kindness. So acknowledging the stress and the painful emotions, not letting it build up, noticing these more toxic reactions that you're going to have, noticing non-compassionate reactions like isolating yourself, and making room for some self-kindness, which can include staying in the present. And that's what we're talking about. We borrow a lot from Kristen Neff in this arena. Her conceptualization of self-compassion in 3 sections here: self-kindness versus self-judgment, common humanity, which is a very powerful concept actually for people struggling with family members who feel very alone and isolated and uniquely bad, and then mindfulness versus over-identification, or as I would translate that, trying to stay in the present and not ruminating on the past or anticipating difficulties in the future. A typical exercise for this might be, oh, actually, I'm sorry. This is that the impact is of willingness is pursuing deeper values, even if you're in pain, that they're not mutually exclusive, helping you share that process with your loved one, because they're going through a process of pain as well, and trying to pursue deeper values themselves. It can help create an inner kindness, help you not be as isolated, and stay in the present. So a typical exercise in this arena would be this type of thing. End of the day, check-in, behavioral exercise, noticing what was hard, noticing what you appreciated, noticing something you felt proud about, and noticing a kindness that you could show yourself. Okay, our last section. Helping with action. And that's colloquially known as in communication tools and behavior tools, helping red lights turn green and catch them being good. I'll explain the garden tools metaphor here. But we also preface these action tools with a framing of what impact do you want to have in these out in the world tools. Given your new understanding of what's happening, given your new awareness of yourself in this change process, can we step back and understand the power of inviting change instead of demanding change? And these would be 2 different approaches to change. So in the communication realm, we walk through the power of communication as a set of tools to turn down the heat, encourage positive behavior, help shift ambivalence, and the kind of negative place you can go to with negative communication. We do this, we as much as possible try to use visual metaphors that are very simple to remember. Red lights, green lights is one that I hear a million times a day when I'm talking to people. It's just a memorable image for people. If we then flesh out the idea of red lights and green lights, it's pausing so you can understand what you're seeing and hearing and feeling, checking in with yourself in terms of awareness. We want to speed through things when we're under stress instead of slowing down. We want to get through the lights, but that improving communication is crucial in allowing for red lights to be seen and respected and green lights to be utilized when they're there. So impact. Communication matters, changes the tone of interactions, reduces conflict, helps a loved one's voice of change get stronger, which would be sort of in the MI world, develops a collaborative approach to helping, which is going to increase conversations and have things feel less charged, and increases the chance that you're going to actually be heard rather than ignored or argued against. So in the tools, there are many, many communication tools. There are many, many books on communication tools. This is full on MI stuff, full on craft stuff in here. We've got something we call SURF, the SURF tools, which is just a shorter acronym-based idea related to Bob Meyer's 7 Steps of Positive Communication. And again, we also try to help people understand that these are transcending, helping my loved one with substance problems to helping myself in my life with these kind of tools. A foundational one, I think we talk about a lot. And again, it's really important to understand the context that the people we're helping are living in. I think of simply listening as a world-shaking communication skill. We can have all kinds of things about open-ended questions and reflections and surfing and making a request and so forth. But just teaching people to listen to another person is a profound shift for many people. Especially if you're in the helping role, to understand the power of listening. And then the last section here is behavioral tools. We think of this as a garden. I will thank Ken Carpenter, my lovely colleague and brilliant partner in a lot of this work, for coming up with the garden metaphor, which is basically what are you going to selectively water and what behaviors will you not be watering. But the idea ties also directly back to where we started, which is the idea that behaviors make sense. And can we help certain behaviors make more sense in this competition for reinforcement? So there are 2 areas. There's positive reinforcement for increasing positive behaviors, and then behavior reducing responses in response to negative behaviors. Again, a lot of craft in here, natural consequences working in that arena. And a lot of those stuff that we talk about are very straightforward, but again, not things that people notice or are aware of in the layperson world. These ideas like reinforcement requires noticing a behavior. It's not just being nice. It'll increase the likelihood that the behavior will happen again. It'll help strengthen positive opposites and helps the person you're helping develop a sense that the world can be rewarding without substance use, even when they're even more so than using. Here in the US, we feel compelled to address this issue of enabling, which is a curse word thrown at many families, and just try to explain to them the difference between actual enabling, if you define it technically, which is just something that you're inadvertently doing that's going to increase the negative behaviors, and that positive reinforcement is not the same as enabling, that you're allowed to do helpful things and loving things with your family member, and that you're doing those to increase non-drinking or non-drug using pro-social behaviors. That clarification is a very important one for us. And then on the behavior reducing side, we have, as I said, allowing natural consequences, setting limits, stepping away, and we talk about the idea that the combination of positive reinforcement and behavior reducing ideas are the most powerful combination. The last section has to do with the center of our circle, and that's the idea that what drives all these ideas and practices is the idea of behavioral practice, which includes the change comes by addition, not subtraction. So we need to practice to add something in, that behaviors are complex and that it can be awkward to add in new things, either as the person trying to change or as the helper, that we really are not good at new things often, and that part of the process is going to be stumbling, and that learning to practice with patience and compassion is going to be a key part of being able to change, which is a really critical thing as a helper for the person, as a family member for the person who's struggling with substances. Can I have patience? Can I understand that you need to learn new behaviors? Okay. Impact of that is that it really allows family members to empathize and practice patience, allows the family member to see that change is a process of learning and adding in new behaviors, not just can I get these bad behaviors to go away. Gives the family member themselves permission to not be perfect. Oh, I'm so sorry, I screamed at them again last night, and that's not what I'm supposed to do, and helps us create compassionate context for helping.
Jeff, can I come in and say, I know you're coming towards the end and you need to, otherwise there won't be time for comments. Okay, yes. I'll shut up.
I will hurry. So that's the whole circle. I got through it. little data, again, with the help of my colleague, Dr. Carpenter. We have over the years been trying to measure people's responses to this. This is when we do direct family trainings directly with parents, overall feedback with 200-300 people in various venues. How satisfied are you with this kind of training? How effective do you feel now in learning these ideas? How much do you feel like it's changed your understanding of substance use issues? How relevant does it feel to your struggles? And would you recommend these ideas? Those are all quite positive in terms of people's reactions to them, which is encouraging. When we go back to the peer-to-peer training we were doing for peer-to-peer coaching, as part of the work we did with Partnership for Drug-Free Kids, this is coaches who had done 4 to 5 phone coaching sessions with other parents who are struggling with these issues in their family, using the invitation to change ideas as part of their coaching. And when you ask, did this to the person who was coached, did this improve things or help or make things worse for you? Their understanding of substance use improved, their mood improved, their sense of decisiveness about how they want to respond improved, their sense of hopefulness improved. They lessened their amount of arguments, and their sense of confidence was significantly impacted. So long way to go for us in terms of dissemination, development of material, continuing assessment of the impact and the effectiveness of this. But that's what we're engaged with our foundation. One particular thing we're trying to focus on is community groups. We've developed a whole peer-to-peer community group, a manualized group leader guide for community lay people to do groups in their own community, give them online resources for the group leaders and members and so forth. So this is the kind of work we're trying to engage with at the moment with this model. And thanks for having me speak.
Yeah, thank you very much for your brilliant talk. There are already some comments and questions in the chat. So I start maybe with a simple question, which is the bars that you showed at the end. If you could give reference to the paper in the chat. And
sure, Ken Carpenter might be in this talk. I'm not sure. He could certainly give the reference to the paper. He wrote the paper. He's the first author on it. And if he's not here, we can get that to people.
Then I also saw the first comment was from Dave, who has turned the camera on already. And I guess it's a question which is related to networking. So if you just could unmute yourself and...
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we're Dave and Tina. We're parents of a son with co-occurring disorders. We've been doing smart family and friends groups and our own groups and all sorts of groups since 2016, wasn't it? We already do, or obviously we've read the Beyond Addiction book, and we already do a lot of motivational interviewing and the ACT as well. But we really struggle with the non-profit charities to get recognised. They treat us as second rate because we're volunteers. Although our groups already do this stuff, but nobody, none of the professionals come and see what we do. They're not interested because we're volunteers. How would we run a invitation to change group for the CMC?
Right. So you're our perfect person on earth. That's who we developed this for. I think we like to think of ourselves as subversives in the sense of like, the hell with the mental health system. We're just going to go directly to the community and say, these are the people being impacted, and how do we actually give these materials over to people so you can do this on your own without the hindrance or help of the mental health professionals of the world. So we're delighted to do that. The trainings we're doing, we're doing a training in November. You can go to our website, certainly, the foundation website, I forget what it is, cmcffc.org. I think we have a training coming up in November. And if it's prohibitively expensive, you can certainly, we can discount things and that kind of stuff, but because that's through our foundation. The purpose of those is, as I was just mentioning at the end there, we have developed a whole community group leaders guide. So if you want to do groups in your community, you need to first go through the 20 hours of training and then some subsequent supervision. Then we hand over that group leader guide for you. It's manualized, so you can actually go through 10 sessions of this invitation to change. It's modularized, so you can do it however you want. You can do a session that's sort of more manual driven, and then a discussion session the next week if you want to. You can take 50 weeks if you want to do it, or you can do it in 10 weeks. It doesn't really matter. It's just a way to start to go through this information and help the people in your group start to understand this and incorporate this information. So happy to talk to you some more, and you can, I don't know, Richard, how people would contact me, but they are certainly welcome to contact me directly about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, we're already ahead of all that, so we're doing the groups. Yeah, so do we need the training?
Well, would be helpful to know the model. So it's Beyond Addiction was the book we wrote 7 years ago, which explains a lot of this thinking and motivational and behavioral ideas and so forth. We've come a long way in terms of the specific model. The invitation to change is not actually part of Beyond Addiction, and it's a much more specific set of ideas that are really much more focused. So that's what we try to do in those groups. We're going to have a manual for that also. So, again, the tension we feel is between fidelity monitoring and just getting the damn stuff out there. And we're leaning more towards getting the damn stuff out there. So, you can just take the group leaders manual and do it, and you'll just do the best you can. If you want to get more training, you can get more training.
That would be perfect, because we're 18 months into the COVID situation, and we've already been doing 18 months worth of groups, while everybody else is just umming and ahhing and doing research and papers and just not getting on with it. So you can imagine it's quite frustrating.
Yeah, for sure.
Lovely. Thanks for your help. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then there was also another question from Pakistan. Namoud Isahar wrote that recovery is also a very important and long process, which is evident to has impact on AFMs as well. And she's working on phenomenology for the PhD. And could you please highlight the significance of AFM's attitude towards recovery in this regard? And I would like to add a bit the question what your experience is like, whether there are AFMs for whom this approach probably might be less suitable than for others.
Sure, I think it's suitable for everyone on Earth, so no. But I'm biased. I think if I understand the initial question correctly, I think I was talking about that at the beginning about the context in which we're helping families. And in that context, I think the most important thing I can say about the context of the family members you're trying to help is that it's different for different family members. I think there's a culture-wide context of negativity, of substance use is a stigmatized phenomenon. People who are using substances, there's something wrong with them in a very generic way. And families feel ashamed. So that would be one way, that one very large ticket that people have punched when they walk in the door. But they may have internalized all of those negative attitudes themselves, and they're angry at their loved one and think they're just addicts and all that kind of stuff. So that context is important to address. So that initial idea of behaviors makes sense is the one that I think of as sort of like prying that away from their brains and helping them think of this in a more empathic way, instead of you're a bad person and I got to get you to stop being a bad person. What happened to the good person I used to know? To that good person is there. They want some important things in their lives, and they're finding them through substances. Maybe we can help them find it through other strategies. So that to me is a very profound contextual shift in the way they think about their loved one. So I think that's answering that question. I think your question, Gallus, is a really important one, and I actually don't have a nuanced answer for it. Who would this not be helpful for? I would like to get back to you about it, though, actually, and I was joking about it's perfect for everybody, but I think it is a challenge for certain people, for sure. Though one thing I will say, and this is again from sort of taking it on the road experience, we've done these trainings across the United States. We've done them. It's always helpful if it's sponsored by some sort of a community-based organization that has an infrastructure in that community that could then support family members who want to do these kind of groups. So they're not just out there on their own trying to do these things. The community infrastructure that has often been the supportive one is Al-Anon or Nar-Anon. Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, has a incredibly powerful Nar-Anon and Al-Anon community. They invited us out to do this training, and they loved hearing this information. And despite what I might think of as a researcher or as a clinician of like, these ideas are in contradistinction to each other sometimes, they don't care. And they just want tools in the toolbox, and they can speak Nar-Anonese and they can speak invitation to change in the same sentence and still use those two sets of tools. So that has been a lesson for us as clinicians and academicians to go stop being so precious with your ideas and let people use the tools. And they'll use them however they want to, and you really can't control them anyway. So I'll just mention that as well. I can't hear you.
Sorry. Question by Therese Collins. Is the direct-to-consumer approach of ITC a result of poor reimbursement capacity when helping the affected family member?
So I think there is poor reimbursement for family services. It has sort of zero to do with where we were coming from. As I was mentioning, where we were coming from was there can never be enough mental health providers. Even if we had good training for mental health providers in substance use issues and compulsive behaviors, there could never be enough people trained to do this work. You know, in the United States, there's 25 million people who have substance use disorder at any given moment. There are not enough treatment providers to help those people. There's 25 million people, and then their family members multiplied by 3 or 4. There's no capacity for that. So from my perspective, community-based, grassroots change of the culture and handing over of the tools to that group of folks, to families who are the most highly motivated and will never give up group you'd ever want to work with. Having them have the tools in their hands is a way to go about this to actually help people.
Okay. And well, we got 2 minutes to go. Another important question is, if someone wants to be a helper but is not an affected family member, is there a different training to help close the 70% gap?
The 70-30 rule. As I said, that's a rule that is meant to help empower people in their own sense of their lived experience. I'll go back to our self-compassion section. I think the lived experience, the common theme for many of us is the common humanity idea here, and bringing yourself as a human being to this process is probably more important than have I actually lived through this as a parent or a loved one in a family with substance use issues. So I wouldn't limit myself because I have not been a family member affected family. I think the fact that you're even here and asking that question means that you can do this work.
Then maybe, since we only got 1 minute to go, one question from Isabella, who works at the Mental Health and Substance Use Service. They used the book I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help a lot. And the question was if you're familiar with this, since she sees many similarities between your approach and that book.
Who's that by? Do we remember?
By Dr. Xavier Amador.
Javier Amador. Javier Amador has been one of my dearest friends for many years. We went to graduate school together. We went our separate paths, and he's worked much more in the specific mental health realm, schizophrenia, awareness of illness, and came back, I think, to a motivational approach for dealing with awareness of illness. So I think they're probably quite compatible ideas.
Okay, wonderful. I just see that we, I think, need to move on regarding the time. There are other important questions in the chat, but thank you again.